Maya sat in her father's study later that night, the small leather journal open before her on the mahogany desk. Her precise handwriting filled page after page with dates, times, observations. Most adults would have dismissed it as a teenager's diary, but Maya had always been methodical about everything, a trait that had served her well in her advanced placement courses and now, apparently, in detecting deception. The first entry was dated 3 months ago. Dad's business dinner. New woman with Mr. Morrison. Victoria something. Claims to be 28, but her hands look older. Keeps checking her phone when she thinks no one is looking. Laughs too loud at his jokes. Maya had inherited her father's analytical mind, though David Chun had always worried his daughter was too observant for her own good. While other teenagers were absorbed in social media and teen dramas, Maya noticed details others missed. It wasn't intentional. She simply couldn't help cataloging the small inconsistencies that revealed people's true natures. The second entry, a week later, Victoria at Dad's company picnic. Says she's allergic to shellfish, but I saw her eating shrimp at the buffet when Mr. Morrison was talking to investors. Small lie, but why lie about allergies? Entry by entry, Maya had documented a pattern of small deceptions that individually meant nothing, but together painted a troubling picture. Victoria's story about her background kept shifting. Sometimes she was from Portland, sometimes Seattle. Her family photos were generic stock images Maya had found with a reverse image search. Her medical appointments never seemed to align with actual doctor's office hours. But it was the pregnancy announcement that had really caught Maya's attention. Victoria had been careful, timing it perfectly for maximum emotional impact during a romantic dinner James had planned for their 4-month anniversary. Maya had been there that night, having dinner with her father at the same restaurant, when Victoria had burst into tears of joy at the news. The timeline bothered Maya immediately. If Victoria was announcing it 4 months into their relationship and claiming 6 weeks pregnant, that meant conception had happened 2 months into dating, exactly when she'd observed Victoria being particularly manipulative about moving into James's penthouse. Maya closed the journal and rubbed her tired eyes. She'd tried to warn her father about her observations, but David had dismissed her concerns as teenage cynicism. Maya, not everyone has ulterior motives, he'd said gently. Sometimes people are just complex. But Maya knew the difference between complexity and deception. She'd watched her mother struggle with that distinction for years before the divorce, making excuses for her father's business partner who'd eventually embezzled from their company. Maya had been only 12 then, but she'd seen the signs her mother had missed. The same careful performance, the same manipulation masked as vulnerability. Now, staring at 3 months of documented evidence, Maya knew she had to find the courage to make James listen. Adults rarely took teenagers seriously, especially quiet ones like her. But Mr. Morrison was different from her father, sharper, more willing to face uncomfortable truths. At least she hoped he was. Tomorrow, she would have to find a way to show him what she'd discovered. The real question was whether he'd be willing to see it. She's lying about being pregnant, Maya whispered, her voice barely audible over the clinking of champagne glasses at the charity gala. The millionaire philanthropist, James Morrison, nearly choked on his drink as he turned to face the quiet teenager who'd somehow appeared beside him. I know because I've been watching her for 3 months, and the timeline doesn't add up. Her dark eyes met his with unexpected intensity. But more importantly, Mr. Morrison, I think I know why she's really doing this to you. The crystal flute trembled in James's hand, the elegant glass threatening to shatter under his suddenly tightened grip. Around them, the gala continued its polished symphony of wealth and charity, but James felt as though the world had tilted off its axis. This shy girl, David Chun's daughter, wasn't she? Had just spoken words that made his blood run cold. Maya melted back into the crowd before he could respond, leaving James staring after her retreating figure, his perfect evening crumbling around him. The shock of Maya's words reverberated through James's mind as he searched the glittering crowd for her small figure. Victoria appeared at his side, radiant in her emerald gown, her hand immediately finding his arm with practiced intimacy. "Darling, you look pale. Are you feeling all right?" Her concern seemed genuine, but Maya's whispered accusation had planted a seed of doubt that was already taking root. James forced a smile, his businessman's training kicking in to mask his turmoil. Just tired from the week, he studied Victoria's face, looking for signs he might have missed. Her pregnancy glow seemed real enough, her hand occasionally drifting to her still flat stomach in that unconscious way expectant mothers develop. But Maya's words echoed, "The timeline doesn't add up. The evening's been such a success," Victoria continued, her voice carrying that slight breathlessness she'd developed since announcing her pregnancy 6 weeks ago. "The foundation raised nearly $2 million tonight. You should be proud." Pride felt impossible when doubt was crawling up his spine like ice. James had built his fortune on reading people, on spotting deception in boardrooms full of sharks. How had he missed something that a teenage girl had apparently seen clearly? Maya shunned David's quiet daughter, who attended these events reluctantly, always hovering at the edges, watching everything with those dark, intelligent eyes. He remembered now how Maya had tried to speak to him once before, a month ago at David's barbecue. She'd approached hesitantly, then retreated when Victoria had swept over with news about baby names and nursery colors. At the time, he'd assumed Maya was just shy around adults. Now he wondered what she'd been trying to tell him. Victoria's laugh drew his attention back. She was chatting with the mayor's wife about prenatal vitamins, her performance flawless. But performance was exactly what Maya had called it, wasn't it? 3 months of watching, she'd said. What had this quiet girl seen that everyone else had missed? The crystal champagne flute caught the light from the chandeliers above, its faceted surface reflecting fragments of the elegant gathering. Such a beautiful, delicate thing, much like the life James had carefully constructed around himself. And now, with just a few whispered words from an unlikely source, that perfect facade was beginning to show hairline cracks that threatened to shatter everything he thought he knew. James had fallen for Victoria Sinclair, the way successful men often did, completely and with uncharacteristic vulnerability. She'd appeared at one of David Chun's networking events 6 months ago, a newcomer to the city with a tragic backstory that immediately captured James's protective instincts. Her previous boyfriend had died in a car accident, leaving her emotionally fragile and financially struggling, despite her marketing degree from what she claimed was Northwestern. Victoria had been perfect in all the ways that mattered to a 42-year-old bachelor who'd built an empire, but struggled with meaningful connections. She was beautiful but not vain, intelligent but not threatening to his ego, independent but grateful for his support. She laughed at his jokes, showed genuine interest in his business ventures, and brought out a tenderness in him that he'd thought was permanently buried under years of corporate ruthlessness. The sonogram photos had appeared during their 5th month together, tucked carefully in her purse during a quiet dinner at home. Victoria had produced them with trembling hands, tears streaming down her face as she explained she'd been too scared to tell him immediately. The images were blurry, but unmistakably real, a tiny form floating in the grainy black and white of ultrasound technology. "I know it's sudden," she'd whispered, "and I understand if you need time to process this. I'm not asking for anything, James. I just thought you deserved to know." Her lack of pressure had been part of her appeal. Unlike other women who'd targeted his wealth over the years, Victoria seemed genuinely conflicted about the pregnancy, worried about disrupting his carefully ordered life. She'd offered to raise the child alone, to move away if he preferred, to ask nothing of him beyond acknowledgement. Of course, James had done the opposite. He'd insisted she move into his penthouse, arranged for the best prenatal care, started talking about marriage with an enthusiasm that surprised them both. His friends had expressed gentle concern about the timeline, but James had dismissed their worries as jealousy or old-fashioned thinking only. Maya had seemed truly troubled by Victoria's presence. James remembered now how the girl would grow, quiet when Victoria was around, how she'd excuse herself from family gatherings when Victoria launched into her animated stories about wedding plans or baby preparations. He'd assumed Maya was just adjusting to her father's business partner getting serious about someone new. But those sonogram photos, Maya had said something about the timeline not adding up. James retrieved them from his bedroom safe, studying the dates and measurements with new eyes. The images were dated 2 weeks ago, showing what appeared to be a 10-week pregnancy. But if Victoria was currently 11 weeks along, as she told the doctor yesterday, the math didn't work. unless she'd gotten the ultrasound done later than she'd claimed, or the dating was wrong, or Maya was right. And Victoria was lying about everything. James found Maya the next morning at the local coffee shop where she often studied before school. She looked up from her calculus textbook with those watchful dark eyes, and he could see her surprise at his approach. Most adults in her orbit treated her as background noise, polite but forgettable. That he was seeking her out clearly caught her off guard. "We need to talk," he said quietly, sliding into the booth across from her. "About what you told me last night." Maya's composure impressed him. She didn't fidget or look away, just nodded slowly and closed her textbook. "I wasn't sure you'd listen." "I'm listening now." James kept his voice low, aware of the morning rush of caffeine-seeking customers around them. "You said you've been watching Victoria for 3 months. What exactly have you seen?" Maya reached into her backpack and pulled out a small leather journal. She opened it to a page marked with a yellow sticky note. "I document things," she said, simply. "It's a habit." But with Victoria, the inconsistencies started adding up. She showed him entries about Victoria's shifting backstory, the medical appointments that didn't match real schedules, the small lies that seemed meaningless individually. But it was what Maya had observed 2 weeks ago that made James's blood run cold. "I was at your building visiting Mrs. Patterson. She tutors me in French," Maya explained. "I saw Victoria in the parking garage, talking on a phone I'd never seen before, a cheap flip phone, not her iPhone. She was arguing with someone about money and timelines." James leaned forward. "What did she say?" "She said he's more attached than the others. I can push the timeline if needed, but the payout needs to be bigger." Then she saw me and hung up immediately. Maya's voice remained steady, but her eyes reflected the weight of what she'd witnessed. She smiled and said hello like nothing happened, but she was shaken. The implications hit James like ice water. Victoria's pregnancy wasn't just a lie. It was part of a larger scheme, and he wasn't her first victim. "Maya, why didn't you tell your father about this?" For the first time, her composure cracked slightly. "I tried. Dad thinks I'm too suspicious of people. He says I see problems where there aren't any because of what happened with Mom." She took a breath. "But this isn't paranoia, Mr. Morrison. Victoria is dangerous." James studied the teenager across from him. At 17, Maya possessed an analytical mind that rivaled many of his business associates. Her observations were methodical, her conclusions logical. Most importantly, she had no ulterior motive for lying to him. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "Help," Maya said simply. "I know what she's doing, but I'm just a kid. No one listens to kids. But together, maybe we can prove what she really is before she destroys your life." James made his decision. "What's our next step?" Maya's smile was small but determined. "We gather more evidence, and we make sure she doesn't know we're watching." Maya's technical skills surprised James. He'd assumed all teenagers were naturally computer savvy, but Maya's abilities went far beyond social media and video games. She'd learned coding from online tutorials and had a natural talent for digital investigation that bordered on professional. Victoria deleted most of her social media history, Maya explained, as they sat in James's private office after hours. But the internet never really forgets anything. She'd printed screenshots of cached pages and archived posts that painted a disturbing picture. Victoria Sinclair had used at least 3 different names over the past 5 years, each associated with a different tragic backstory designed to elicit sympathy from wealthy men. "Here's Victoria Thompson from Portland, whose fiancé died in military service," Maya said, laying out the first set of photos. "She was engaged to a tech entrepreneur for 8 months before disappearing with $50,000 from his business account." The next set showed Victoria Martinez from Denver. Her story was a sick mother and medical bills. She conned a real estate mogul out of $120,000 over 6 months. James felt sick as he recognized the pattern. Each relationship followed the same timeline: initial vulnerability, quick intimacy, then a crisis requiring financial support. The pregnancy angle was new, though, which suggested Victoria was evolving her methods. "The scariest part," Maya continued, "is how she studies her targets. Look at this." She showed him a private Instagram account under yet another name where Victoria had been gathering intelligence on James for months before they accidentally met at David's networking event. Photos of his apartment building, his favorite restaurants, even pictures of James himself, taken from a distance at various business functions. She knew everything about you before you knew she existed, Maya said quietly. Your schedule, your interests, your relationship history. She crafted herself to be exactly what you thought you wanted. James stared at the evidence spread across his desk. How long do these relationships usually last? Based on the pattern? 6 to 8 months. Just long enough to establish trust and access to finances, but not long enough for the mark to become suspicious of inconsistencies. Maya's voice carried a weight beyond her years. You're at month 6, Mr. Morrison. She's in the endgame. The realization that he'd been so thoroughly manipulated stung his professional pride. But Maya's matter-of-fact presentation helped him focus on solutions rather than shame. She wasn't judging him. She was trying to save him. There's more, Maya said, pulling up a spreadsheet on her laptop. I tracked the timing of her various crises and financial requests. They always coincide with her targets having liquid assets available bonuses, investment returns, property sales. James reviewed his recent financial calendar and felt his stomach drop. He'd just closed a major deal, and Victoria had been increasingly anxious about prenatal care costs and wanting to secure a larger apartment for their growing family. She's accelerating the timeline, he realized. Maya nodded grimly. The question is whether we can expose her before she disappears with whatever she's planning to take. James looked at the scattered evidence of his deception and made a decision. Then we'd better move fast. Eleanor Blackwood had been James's mentor since he was 25, a brilliant woman who built her own financial empire in an era when female executives were rare. Now in her 70s, she served on James's board and remained one of his most trusted advisors. When he called requesting an urgent meeting, she invited him to her penthouse without question. I've been wondering when you'd come to me about her, Eleanor said before James could speak. She was arranging fresh flowers in her sitting room, her movements deliberate and graceful despite her age. James felt a familiar mix of admiration and slight intimidation. Eleanor always seemed to know things before others figured them out. You've had concerns about Victoria? Concerns is putting it mildly. Eleanor set down her pruning shears and turned to face him fully. James, that woman is poison wrapped in pretty packaging. I've seen her type before. She walked to an antique secretary desk and retrieved a manila folder. From it, she pulled a yellowed newspaper clipping dated 15 years earlier. The headline read, Local businessman loses fortune to romance scam. Richard Castellanos, Eleanor said softly. We were friends. Brilliant man, successful architect, completely destroyed by a woman who played the same game Victoria's playing with you. James read the article with growing unease. The parallels were disturbing. A vulnerable woman with a tragic past, a whirlwind romance, pregnancy announcement, and eventual financial devastation when the woman disappeared with access to Castellanos's accounts. Richard never recovered, Eleanor continued. Lost his business, his reputation, his will to trust anyone again. He died 3 years later, and I've always believed that woman killed him as surely as if she'd used a weapon. The weight of Eleanor's words settled heavily in the room. Why didn't you say something sooner? Eleanor's expression grew sad. Because men in love don't listen to warnings, especially from older women. They assume we're jealous or bitter. You would have dismissed me as a meddling old lady, and Victoria would have used my concerns to drive a wedge between us. She was right, and James knew it. 6 months ago, he would have defended Victoria against any criticism, no matter how well-intentioned. But something's changed, Eleanor observed. You're here, which means you've seen through her facade. How? James told her about Maya's observations and the evidence they'd gathered. Eleanor listened intently, nodding occasionally. That girl has good instincts, Eleanor said when he finished. Young women often see through other women's deceptions more clearly than men do. They understand the performance in ways we miss. Eleanor returned to her desk and pulled out a business card. This is Detective Sarah Martinez with the Financial Crimes Division. She investigated Richard's case and has been tracking similar patterns across the country. If Maya's right about Victoria's previous victims, Detective Martinez will want to hear from you. James pocketed the card. Why are you helping me now when you couldn't before? Eleanor's smile was both sad and wise. Because now you're ready to listen. And because that young lady you're working with reminds me of myself at that age, too smart for her own good and determined to protect people who can't see the danger coming. She placed a gentle hand on his arm. James, this isn't just about you anymore. Women like Victoria don't stop. They move from victim to victim, leaving destruction in their wake. If we can expose her, we might save the next man, and the one after that. The responsibility felt enormous, but with Eleanor's support and Maya's evidence, James finally felt like they had a fighting chance. What do we do next? He asked. We give Victoria exactly what she wants, Eleanor said with a slight smile, and we make sure she hangs herself with it. Detective Sarah Martinez met them at Eleanor's penthouse the following evening. She was younger than James had expected, perhaps 40, with sharp eyes that reminded him of Maya's analytical gaze. When Maya presented her research, the detective's expression grew increasingly grim. This matches patterns we've been tracking across multiple states, Detective Martinez said, reviewing Maya's printed screenshots and timeline analysis. We have a task force investigating what we believe is an organized romance fraud network, but the perpetrators are sophisticated. They use false identities, forge documents, and disappear before victims realize they've been targeted. Maya had prepared additional evidence that demonstrated the scope of Victoria's deception. Bank statements James had never seen showed money transfers to accounts he didn't recognize, medical bills for prenatal care at clinics that didn't exist. Even her apartment lease, which she'd claimed was in her name, was actually registered to someone named Patricia Villanueva. The financial manipulation is textbook, Detective Martinez explained. Small requests at first dinner expenses, gas, money, minor emergencies. Then larger needs, security deposits, medical bills, family crisis. Each request seems reasonable individually, but collectively they establish a pattern of financial dependence. James realized with sickening clarity how thoroughly he'd been played. Victoria had never asked for money directly. Instead, she'd created situations where offering financial support felt like his idea, his choice, his way of caring for her. The pregnancy is the ultimate manipulation, Detective Martinez continued. It creates an emotional bond and a sense of permanent responsibility. Even if the relationship ends, the victim feels obligated to provide ongoing support for the child. Maya spoke up quietly. But there is no child, is there? Based on the evidence you've gathered, almost certainly not. The sonogram images are likely stolen or fabricated. We've seen this before. Women who fake entire pregnancies, complete with doctor visits and medical documentation. Eleanor had been listening intently. How do we prove it? Detective Martinez pulled out a legal document. We need James to file a formal complaint and work with us to gather additional evidence. With Maya's documentation and James's cooperation, we can build a case. But it means James will have to continue the relationship while we investigate. The prospect of continuing to live with Victoria, knowing what he now knew, made James's skin crawl. But he thought about Richard Castellanos and the unnamed victims in other cities, and he knew he had no choice. There's something else, Maya said hesitantly. I've been monitoring Victoria's communications. She's planning something big. Next week, when you get the payout from the Meridian deal, she's going to claim pregnancy complications and need immediate access to your emergency funds. Detective Martinez leaned forward. How much money are we talking about? James felt sick. $2.7 million. The account she'd have access to as my emergency contact. That's her exit strategy, Detective Martinez said grimly. She'll create a medical crisis, take the money for emergency surgery, and disappear. By the time you realize she's gone, she'd be in another state with a new identity. The room fell, silent as the magnitude of Victoria's plan sank in. She wasn't just stealing money, she was destroying lives with surgical precision. So we stop her, Maya said with quiet determination. We give her the opportunity she wants, and make sure she takes it. But this time, we're ready for her. James looked around at these three remarkable women, a teenager who'd seen through Victoria's lies, the mentor who'd recognized the danger, and the detective who'd dedicated her career to stopping predators like Victoria. For the first time since this nightmare began, he felt hopeful. Let's do it, he said. Let's end this. James's first attempt to confront Victoria was a disaster. Despite Detective Martinez's coaching and Maya's evidence, he underestimated Victoria's ability to manipulate any situation to her advantage. When he carefully broached questions about her pregnancy timeline, Victoria immediately sensed danger and shifted into survival mode. "I know what this is about," Victoria said, tears welling in her eyes as they sat in their apartment's living room. "Maya's been filling your head with lies, hasn't she? That girl has never liked me, and now she's trying to destroy us." James had prepared for denial, but Victoria's instant pivot to painting Maya as the villain caught him off guard. "This isn't about Maya. I just want to understand some inconsistencies." "Inconsistencies?" Victoria's voice cracked with what seemed like genuine hurt. "James, I'm carrying your child, our child, and you're listening to a jealous teenager who's probably upset that you're not paying attention to her anymore." Before James could respond, Victoria disappeared into the bathroom. She emerged minutes later with a pregnancy test, the positive result clearly visible. "If you need proof, here it is, fresh from this morning." The physical evidence was damning, but James remembered Detective Martinez's warnings about how easily such tests could be manipulated. Still, seeing the positive results shook his confidence in their investigation. Victoria pressed her advantage. "Maya's disturbed, James. I've watched her watching me, following me, taking pictures. It's stalking behavior. That girl needs help, not encouragement for her delusions." The accusations against Maya infuriated James, but Victoria's performance was flawless. She mixed just enough truth Maya had been watching her with skillful distortion to create doubt. Any outside observer would see a pregnant woman defending herself against a jealous teenager's accusations. "I think we should talk to David about getting Maya some counseling," Victoria continued, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "This obsession with me isn't healthy for her." James felt the trap closing around him. Victoria was positioning herself as the victim and Maya as an unstable teenager. If he pushed harder, Victoria would likely claim he was being manipulated by a disturbed girl, possibly even involving authorities to have Maya evaluated or restrained. "You're right," James said carefully, hating himself for the lie. "I'm sorry for doubting you. The stress of the pregnancy must be affecting my judgment." Victoria's relief seemed genuine as she collapsed into his arms. "I know this is scary for both of us, but we're going to be a family, James. Nothing Maya says can change." Later that night, after Victoria had fallen asleep, James texted Maya. "She turned everything around, made you the villain. We need a new approach." Maya's response came quickly. "Expected that. Don't worry. I'm recording everything now. She just showed us exactly who she really is." James realized that Victoria's masterful manipulation had actually revealed something crucial. She was far more dangerous than they'd imagined. She didn't just lie. She weaponized truth and emotion to destroy anyone who threatened her. Maya had been right to approach this carefully. The pregnancy test sat on the bathroom counter, mocking him with its positive result. But James now understood that physical evidence could be fabricated as easily as emotional manipulation. Victoria wasn't just a con artist. She was a psychological predator who turned her victim's own protective instincts against them. Tomorrow, they would have to be smarter, more careful, and completely prepared for Victoria's next move. The game was far from over. Maya refused to let Victoria's counterattack succeed. If anything, seeing Victoria manipulate James so skillfully only strengthened her resolve. The next morning, she called James with a plan that demonstrated just how serious she was about exposing the truth. "I've been recording everything," Maya said when they met at the coffee shop. "Audio recordings of her phone calls, video of her activities when she thinks no one's watching. I know it's risky, but we need irrefutable evidence." She showed James her phone, which contained hours of carefully documented footage. There was Victoria throwing away pregnancy vitamins when she thought she was alone. Victoria practicing emotional responses in front of a mirror. Most damning of all, Victoria having an animated phone conversation about wrapping up the Morrison job and preparing for her next target in Seattle. "Maya, this is dangerous," James said, genuinely worried for the teenager's safety. "If Victoria realizes what you're doing, she already suspects. But that's working in our favor." Maya's calm confidence reminded James why he trusted her instincts from the beginning. "Yesterday, when she accused me of stalking her, she revealed something important. She knows I'm a threat, which means she's going to make a mistake trying to neutralize me." The security footage from James's building was the breakthrough they needed. Maya had convinced the building manager to let her review the tapes by explaining she was working on a school project about urban security systems. What she'd found was devastating. Victoria had been meeting with an unknown man in the parking garage twice a week for the past month. The footage showed him passing her envelopes and documents, and her giving him what appeared to be keys and access cards. Most tellingly, there was video of Victoria practicing her pregnancy announcement in her car before going upstairs to tell James the news. "She's not working alone," Maya explained. "This is an organized operation. That man is probably her handler or partner, helping coordinate the fraud." James studied the grainy security footage with new understanding. Victoria's performance had been too perfect, too precisely calibrated to his weaknesses. She'd had professional help, studying his psychology and crafting her approach. "There's more," Maya continued. "I tracked the license plate on his car. It's registered to a company that doesn't exist at an address that's a vacant lot. But Detective Martinez might be able to trace it further." Maya's courage amazed James. At 17, she was conducting a better investigation than most professionals would manage. But he was also terrified of what might happen if Victoria discovered how thoroughly Maya had been documenting her activities. "Maya, I need you to promise me something," James said seriously. "If Victoria threatens you or tries to hurt you in any way, you tell me immediately. Don't try to handle it alone." Maya's expression softened slightly. "Mr. Morrison, I know you're worried about me, but Victoria isn't going to hurt me directly. That would be too obvious, too risky. She's going to try to discredit me, make everyone think I'm unstable or obsessed. But I'm ready for that too." She pulled out another device, a small digital recorder. "Everything she says to me or about me is being documented. If she tries to paint me as mentally unstable, I'll have proof of her lies and manipulation tactics." James realized that Maya had thought several steps ahead of everyone, including Victoria. The shy teenager who'd whispered her suspicions at the charity gala had transformed into a formidable investigator who refused to be intimidated. "What's our next step?" he asked. Maya's smile was small but determined. "We give her exactly what she wants, and we make sure she takes it where we can watch." The trap they devised was elegant in its simplicity. Working with Detective Martinez, James created a convincing but completely fabricated investment opportunity, a private equity deal that would require immediate liquid capital and promised enormous returns. The fake contract looked legitimate, complete with forged letterhead and financial projections that would make any con artist's eyes light up. Maya's strategic thinking impressed everyone involved. Victoria's pattern is to create crises that require immediate access to large sums. She explained to the planning team that now included Detective Martinez, Eleanor, and James. If we give her advance notice of a major windfall, she accelerate her timeline and expose herself. The plan required James to perform the most difficult role of his life, the excited victim eagerly sharing news of his good fortune with the woman who was plotting to steal it. That evening, he returned to the apartment with champagne and the fake contract, his acting skills tested to their limits. "Victoria, you're not going to believe what just happened," he said, his enthusiasm carefully calibrated to seem genuine. "Remember that tech startup I told you about? They just offered me a payout that's worth $15 million. Victoria's reaction was perfect surprise, excitement, and just the right amount of concern about whether the deal was legitimate. But Maya, watching from the building's security office with Detective Martinez, saw what James missed, the micro-expression of calculation that crossed Victoria's face before she composed herself. 15 million? Victoria breathed her. Victoria moved faster than even Maya had predicted. The next morning, while James was at work, she called him with trembling urgency in her voice. "James, something's wrong with the baby. I'm bleeding, and the doctor says I need to get to the hospital immediately." James had been expecting this call, but Victoria's performance was so convincing that for a moment he felt genuine panic. "I'm coming right now." "Which hospital?" "St. Mary's Emergency," Victoria sobbed. "Dr. Chun says it might be a threatened miscarriage." "James, I'm so scared." "What if we lose our baby?" The cruel irony of her using a fake Dr. Chun sharing Maya's surname wasn't lost on James. He left work immediately, playing his role as the panicked, expectant father while texting Maya and Detective Martinez that Victoria had taken the bait. At the hospital, Victoria had orchestrated an elaborate scene. She was in a private room, connected to monitors, with what appeared to be medical staff attending to her. The paperwork showed complications, requiring immediate intervention that would cost $40,000 up front, money that would need to come from James's emergency account. The insurance won't cover experimental treatments, Victoria explained, tearfully. But Dr. Chan says this procedure could save the baby. I know it's a lot of money, but ... James played his part perfectly, immediately agreeing to whatever cost was necessary. But Maya, who had positioned herself in the hospital's public areas, noticed something crucial. The medical staff were actors, and Victoria's monitor readings were being manually controlled. The staged medical emergency document was a masterpiece of forgery, complete with official letterhead and medical terminology that would convince most people. But Maya had researched the supposed procedure and discovered it didn't exist in any legitimate medical database. She's using a network, Maya texted James. The hospital room is real, but she's paid off staff to create a fake emergency. The doctor she keeps mentioning doesn't work here. James felt a mixture of admiration and horror at the sophistication of Victoria's operation. She wasn't just a lone con artist. She was part of an organized group that could stage medical emergencies, forge official documents, and manipulate institutional systems. Victoria's emotional performance was flawless as she begged James to authorize the transfer of funds. I know this is our nest egg, but if we lose the baby... She dissolved into tears that seemed completely genuine. Of course, James said, pulling out his phone to arrange the transfer. Our child's life is worth more than any amount of money. But instead of transferring funds to the hospital account Victoria had provided, James was actually transferring money to a secure account controlled by Detective Martinez. The transaction would appear successful on Victoria's end, but the money would be safely held as evidence. Victoria's relief was palpable as the transfer went through. Thank you, she whispered, clutching his hand. You're going to be such an amazing father. James had to leave the room to compose himself. Victoria's ability to maintain her performance, even while stealing from him, was both impressive and deeply disturbing. She wasn't just taking his money, she was destroying his capacity to trust, to love, to believe in human goodness. But Maya's courage and Detective Martinez's expertise were about to ensure that Victoria's latest victim would also be her last. The trap was closing, and Victoria had walked directly into it with her eyes wide open. The confrontation happened sooner than anyone expected. Victoria, believing she had successfully extracted the money and with her escape route planned, made a critical error in her overconfidence. When James returned to their apartment that evening, he found her packing with an efficiency that spoke of extensive practice. The doctor wants me to stay in a specialist facility for observation, Victoria explained, not looking up from her methodical folding. It's in Portland, where my family can support me during this difficult time. James knew this was goodbye, though Victoria was maintaining her performance to the end. How long will you be gone? It's hard to say. The pregnancy complications are serious, and I need to focus entirely on our baby's health. Her voice carried just the right note of brave sacrifice. I think it's better if I handle this alone for now. That's when Maya appeared in the doorway. James hadn't heard her come in, but she stood there with quiet determination, no longer hiding her investigation. Actually, Victoria, I think it's time we talked about who you really are. Victoria's mask slipped for just an instant, a flash of pure fury that Maya had dared to confront her directly. But she recovered quickly, turning to James with wounded confusion. James, I thought we agreed Maya needed professional help for her obsession with me. The only person who needs help is you, Maya said calmly. She pulled out her phone and began playing audio recordings. Victoria's voice filled the room, speaking to her partner about closing the Morrison job and preparing fake medical documentation. Victoria's response was swift and vicious. She lunged toward Maya, clearly intending to destroy the phone, but her purse caught on the coffee table and spilled its contents across the floor. Among the scattered items were multiple driver's licenses, credit cards, and identification documents, all with Victoria's photo, but different names and addresses. Patricia Villanueva, Sarah Chun, Victoria Martinez, Maya read aloud, collecting the fallen IDs. How many other people are you pretending to be? Victoria stood frozen, her carefully constructed world literally scattered at her feet. The multiple identities represented years of fraud across multiple states, and their discovery meant her entire operation was compromised beyond recovery. This isn't what it looks like, Victoria said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. With her false identities exposed and Maya's recordings as evidence, even Victoria's considerable skills couldn't craft a believable explanation. James stared at the woman he'd thought he loved, seeing her clearly for the first time. The vulnerability that had drawn him to her was revealed as calculated manipulation. The pregnancy that had bonded them was exposed as an elaborate lie. Even her name was fake. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. The mask of victimhood fell away, revealing the predator beneath. "I'm someone who saw an opportunity and took it," she said coldly. "You were lonely, wealthy, and desperate for connection. I gave you exactly what you wanted." Maya stepped closer, no longer the shy teenager who'd whispered warnings at a charity gala. "And now it's over." Victoria's laugh was bitter and sharp. "You think you've won something? There are dozens of men like James in every city, and they all want the same thing: to feel special, to feel needed, to feel like heroes. I just gave them the chance." Detective Martinez chose that moment to enter with backup officers. Having monitored the situation from the building's security office, Victoria's game was finished, but her words lingered in the air like poison, a reminder of how thoroughly she'd understood and exploited human longing. As the handcuffs clicked around Victoria's wrists, James felt a strange mixture of relief and emptiness. The nightmare was ending, but the scars would take much longer to heal. Maya stood beside him, her quiet strength a reminder that not everyone who saw clearly into human nature chose to exploit it. Some people used their perceptiveness to protect, others to seek truth, to stand guard against predators like Victoria. "It's over," Maya said softly, and James finally believed it was true. The police file on Victoria, whose real name turned out to be Rebecca Walsh, was a testament to the scope of her criminal enterprise. Detective Martinez spread the documents across the conference room table like a roadmap of devastation that stretched across 5 states and nearly a decade of sophisticated fraud. 14 confirmed victims, Detective Martinez reported to the assembled group. Estimated losses totaling over $4 million. She's been refining her techniques for years, learning from each operation to become more effective with the next target. Maya studied the photographs of Victoria's previous victims with an intensity that worried James. These were real people whose lives had been destroyed by the woman who'd almost succeeded in destroying his. Successful men reduced to financial ruin, emotional wreckage. Some who'd never recovered their capacity to trust or love again. The pregnancy angle is relatively new, Detective Martinez continued. She started using it about 2 years ago, probably because it creates stronger emotional bonds and justifies larger financial requests. Before that, she relied on sick relatives, legal troubles, and business emergencies. Eleanor, who had remained silent through most of the briefing, finally spoke. "What happened to her to create this level of predatory behavior?" "That's the disturbing part," Detective Martinez replied. "Rebecca Walsh grew up in a stable, middle-class family. Good education, no history of abuse or trauma. She chose this life because she was good at it and because it was profitable. This isn't a case of someone driven to crime by desperation. It's calculated, premeditated exploitation." The file revealed Victoria's methodical approach to target selection. She researched potential victims for months, studying their financial records, relationship histories, and psychological profiles. She knew James's mother had died when he was young, leaving him with abandonment issues. She knew he'd been betrayed by a previous business partner, making him hungry for unconditional loyalty. She'd crafted herself to be exactly what his damaged psyche needed. "The man she was meeting in your parking garage is her partner, Thomas Brennan," Detective Martinez explained. "He's the technical specialist who helps forge documents, create false identities, and launder money. They've been working together for 5 years. Maya's voice was quiet but steady. "How many other victims don't know yet? How many men are still being targeted right now? We're coordinating with law enforcement in 6 states to identify active cases." Based on Victoria's communications, There are at least 3 other operations in progress. Detective Martinez looked at Maya with genuine respect. Your documentation and evidence gathering is what made this possible. Without your investigation, she would have disappeared with your money and continued victimizing others indefinitely. The weight of that responsibility sat heavily on Maya's shoulders. James could see her processing the knowledge that her courage to speak up had potentially saved multiple lives and prevented financial devastation for families she'd never meet. What happens now? James asked. Victoria Rebecca faces federal charges for wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. With the evidence you've gathered and testimony from other victims, she's looking at 20 to 30 years in federal prison. Thomas Brennan was arrested this morning and is already cooperating in exchange for a reduced sentence. Eleanor leaned forward. And the money she stole from previous victims? We're working to recover what we can, but most of it was moved through offshore accounts and shell companies. Some victims may recover partial restitution, but many will never see their money again. The finality of it struck James hard. Victoria had destroyed lives with surgical precision, and most of her victims would never fully recover. He was fortunate that Maya had seen through Victoria's deception before she could complete her theft, but others hadn't been so lucky. Maya gathered the scattered police reports and photographs with careful precision. Detective Martinez, I want to help contact the other victims. They deserve to know it's over, and they deserve to know they're not alone. Detective Martinez smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. We could use someone with your investigative skills and your understanding of how these predators operate. As they left the police station, James realized that Maya had found her calling. Her analytical mind and perceptive nature, combined with her quiet determination to protect others, made her a natural advocate for victims of sophisticated fraud. Victoria had inadvertently created her own most effective nemesis. The legal process transformed Maya from a shy teenager into a confident advocate. When the federal prosecutor explained that her testimony would be crucial to securing Victoria's conviction, Maya approached the responsibility with the same methodical precision she'd applied to her investigation. The defense will try to portray you as an obsessed teenager with an overactive imagination. Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh warned during their preparation session. They'll claim your evidence was gathered illegally and that you were stalking their client. Maya's response surprised everyone in the room. Let them try. I have documentation of every interaction, every observation, every piece of evidence I gathered. I was careful to stay within legal boundaries because I knew this day would come. The witness statement forms required Maya to detail 3 months of investigation in precise legal language. Working with Attorney Walsh, she transformed her teenager's journal into a comprehensive case file that read like a professional investigation report. James watched Maya during the preparation sessions with growing admiration. She answered every question with calm precision, never embellishing or speculating beyond what she could prove. When challenged about her motivations for investigating Victoria, she simply said, I saw someone hurting Mr. Morrison, and I couldn't stand by and watch. The federal courthouse intimidated most witnesses, but Maya seemed to find strength in its formal atmosphere. Here, finally, was a place where evidence mattered more than charm, where truth was valued over manipulation, where her quiet observations carried the same weight as anyone else's testimony. Victoria's defense attorney, Marcus Goldberg, was exactly what James had expected: expensive, aggressive, and skilled at creating doubt where none should exist. During Maya's deposition, he attacked her credibility with surgical precision. Miss Chun, isn't it true that you have a history of making false accusations against adults in your life? Maya's response was measured and calm. No, sir. I've never made false accusations against anyone. But your parents divorced when you were 14, and court records show you accused your father's business partner of financial impropriety. Yes, sir. Mr. Hansen was subsequently convicted of embezzling $200,000 from my father's company. Maya's voice never wavered. My accusations were proven accurate in court. Goldberg's strategy backfired spectacularly. Instead of portraying Maya as unreliable, he'd inadvertently established her track record of accurately identifying financial fraud. The prosecutor, Jennifer Walsh, couldn't have asked for better character evidence. James's testimony was more emotionally difficult, but equally important. He had to describe in detail how Victoria had manipulated his emotions. exploited his vulnerabilities, and systematically isolated him from friends and family who might have warned him about her behavior. She made me feel special, James admitted during his testimony. She seemed to understand me in ways no one else ever had. I now realized that was because she'd studied my psychological profile and crafted herself to be exactly what I needed. Eleanor's testimony provided historical context, describing how Victoria's methods matched patterns she'd seen in previous cases of romance fraud. Her authority and experience lent weight to the prosecution's argument that Victoria was a sophisticated predator, not a confused woman making poor choices. The witness statements formed a comprehensive picture of Victoria's calculated deception. Maya's evidence established the pattern of lies and manipulation. James's testimony demonstrated the emotional and financial damage. Eleanor's expertise provided professional context for understanding predatory behavior. Together, they created an unassailable case that even Victoria's skilled defense attorney couldn't overcome. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimony credible, and the pattern of behavior clear. But for Maya, the legal victory was secondary to a more important realization. Standing in that federal courthouse, her voice carrying the weight of truth and justice, she finally understood her own power. Her quiet observations and careful analysis could protect people, expose predators, and prevent future victims. The shy teenager who'd whispered warnings at a charity gala had found her voice, and it was strong enough to bring down even the most sophisticated criminal enterprise. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, handwritten on cream-colored stationery with a return address in Denver, Colorado. Maya found it waiting on her desk when she returned from her morning run, her father having collected the mail and left it in the neat stack where she always kept her correspondence. Dear Maya, the letter began in careful script. My name is Robert Chun, no relation, despite sharing your surname. Detective Martinez provided me with your contact information and explained how your investigation helped expose the woman who destroyed my life 2 years ago. Maya settled into her desk chair, her heart already racing as she recognized the significance of this correspondence. This was one of Victoria's previous victims, one of the men whose photographs she'd studied in the police files, whose financial devastation she'd helped quantify during the investigation. I want you to know that what you did, having the courage to speak up, to investigate, to refuse to let her continue, gave me something I thought I'd lost forever: hope. For 2 years, I believed I was the only one stupid enough to fall for her lies. I blamed myself for being weak, for being gullible, for not seeing through her performance. The letter continued for 3 pages, detailing Robert's experience with Victoria, then calling herself Sarah Martinez in the systematic way she'd destroyed his construction business and his faith in human nature. His story was heartbreakingly similar to James's experience. But without Maya's intervention, Robert had lost everything. When Detective Martinez called to tell me she'd been arrested, I cried for the first time since Sarah disappeared with my money. Not tears of sadness, but tears of relief. I wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't uniquely foolish. I was simply the victim of a sophisticated predator who'd done this to many others. Maya had to pause in her reading, overwhelmed by the weight of gratitude in Robert's words. She'd known intellectually that Victoria had multiple victims, but receiving this personal account made the human cost devastatingly real. But more than that, Robert continued, your courage inspired me to seek help. I've been in therapy for 3 months now, working through the trauma and learning to trust again. I'm starting a new business, smaller than before, but built on lessons learned from my experience. I'm even considering dating again, though I'm much more careful about red flags now. The letter concluded with words that Maya would treasure forever. You're 17 years old, and you have already saved more lives than most people do in a lifetime. You saw evil and chose to fight it. You saw injustice and chose to expose it. You saw someone in danger and chose to protect them. That takes a special kind of courage, and I wanted you to know that your bravery changed my life. Maya read the letter 3 times before calling James to share the news. He listened quietly as she read portions aloud, both of them moved by the realization that their investigation had ripple effects they were only beginning to understand. There will be more letters, James said quietly. More victims who find out it's over, who discover they're not alone. Eleanor, who had come to occupy a grandmother-like role in Maya's life, put the letter's significance in perspective during their weekly tea. Maya, dear, you've learned something that takes most people decades to understand. Individual actions matter. One person's courage can change everything. James had recovered remarkably well from his ordeal, helped by therapy and the knowledge that he'd played a crucial role in stopping Victoria's criminal enterprise. But Maya knew that Robert's letter meant more to him than any personal healing. It was proof that their investigation had prevented other men from suffering the same devastation. The letter sat framed on Maya's desk, a reminder that quiet strength could indeed move mountains. But more than that, it was validation that her analytical mind and observational skills could be used to protect people, to seek justice, and to prevent future victims from experiencing the pain that Victoria had inflicted on so many. Maya was already planning her college applications. With a clear focus on criminal justice and victim advocacy, she'd found her calling in the most unlikely way, and she was determined to spend her life ensuring that predators like Victoria faced consequences for their actions. The shy teenager who'd been dismissed by adults had become a voice for those who couldn't speak for themselves. Maya's college application essay began with a simple statement. I learned that the most important conversations often happen in whispers. She'd written 17 drafts before finding the right words to capture her transformation from observer to advocate, from shy teenager to confident voice for justice. James sat in her father's study, reading the final version with the pride of a mentor, watching his protégés surpass his own achievements. The essay was brilliant in its restraint, focusing not on the dramatic elements of exposing Victoria's fraud, but on the quiet moments of choice that had defined Maya's character. The hardest part wasn't gathering evidence or confronting a dangerous criminal, Maya had written. The hardest part was finding the courage to speak up when I knew adults might not listen. But I learned that being heard isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the most truthful. The essay detailed Maya's investigation without sensationalizing it, focusing instead on the analytical skills, ethical reasoning, and emotional intelligence that had made her effective. She wrote about learning to trust her instincts while verifying her observations with evidence. She described the responsibility she felt to protect others from predators who exploited human vulnerabilities. Throughout this experience, I discovered that my quiet nature wasn't a weakness to overcome, but a strength to develop. While others spoke without thinking, I learned to observe without judging. While others acted on impulse, I learned to gather evidence and plan carefully. The same traits that made me seem invisible to many adults became the tools that allowed me to see what others missed. Eleanor had helped Maya refine the essay, drawing on her decades of experience in identifying talent and potential. Don't undersell your accomplishments, she'd advised. What you did was extraordinary, and universities need to understand that. You're not just academically gifted, you're someone who applies her intelligence to protect others. The essay concluded with Maya's vision for her future. I want to study criminal justice, not because I'm fascinated by crime, but because I'm committed to preventing victims. I want to develop expertise in financial fraud investigation, victim advocacy, and predator identification. I want to use my analytical skills to protect people who are vulnerable to sophisticated manipulation. James had also written a recommendation letter that focused on Maya's professional-level investigative skills and her mature handling of a dangerous situation. He'd been careful to emphasize her intellectual capabilities while highlighting her emotional intelligence and ethical reasoning. Maya Chun possesses the rare combination of analytical brilliance and moral courage that defines exceptional leaders. He'd written, her investigation of a sophisticated fraud scheme demonstrated not only her technical abilities, but her commitment to protecting others at considerable personal risk. Eleanor's recommendation focused on Maya's character and potential for future leadership. In my 50 years of business experience, I have rarely encountered someone so young with such clear moral vision and the courage to act on her convictions. Maya Chun will undoubtedly become a leader in whatever field she chooses to pursue. The applications went to schools with strong criminal justice programs, with particular emphasis on institutions that offered opportunities for research and victim advocacy. Maya had carefully researched professors who specialized in financial crimes and white-collar criminal behavior, identifying mentors who could help her develop her natural talents. Detective Martinez had also provided a recommendation focusing on Maya's potential for law enforcement and her understanding of criminal psychology. Miss Chan's investigative instincts and analytical abilities are at a professional level. She has the temperament and skills to become an exceptional agent or prosecutor. But beyond the technical aspects of her applications, Maya's essay revealed her deeper understanding of the experience that had changed her life. She'd learned that justice wasn't always dramatic or public sometimes. It happened in quiet moments when someone chose to speak truth to power, the shy teenager who'd whispered warnings at a charity. Dyla was now confidently articulating her vision for a career dedicated to protecting others from predators who exploited human vulnerabilities. Her voice had been found, and it was strong enough to change the world. The news article appeared in the local paper 6 months after Victoria's conviction, written by investigative journalist Sarah Kim, who had covered the trial extensively. The headline read, "Teen's Investigation Leads to Conviction of Romance. Fraud Ring," but the story focused on the broader implications of Maya's work rather than sensationalizing her age. Maya Chan's methodical investigation of suspected fraud demonstrates how citizens can effectively assist law enforcement in combating sophisticated criminal enterprises, Kim wrote. Her documentation and evidence gathering were instrumental in securing federal convictions and preventing additional victims. The article carefully protected Maya's privacy while highlighting the significance of her contribution to the case. It explained how romance fraud had become increasingly sophisticated, with organized rings targeting vulnerable individuals through emotional manipulation and psychological exploitation. James read the article over morning coffee, impressed by how accurately it captured the professional quality of Maya's investigation without exploiting her youth for dramatic effect. The journalist had focused on the methods and outcomes rather than the personal story. Exactly what Maya had requested when she'd agreed to the interview. Cases like this demonstrate the importance of trusting instincts and seeking help when something feels wrong. Detective Martinez was quoted as saying, "Maya Chun's courage to speak up potentially saved multiple future victims from financial and emotional devastation." The article had an immediate impact on the community's awareness of romance fraud tactics. The police department reported a significant increase in calls from people who suspected they were being targeted by similar schemes. 2 additional investigations were launched based on tips from readers who recognized patterns described in the article. Maya's high school counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez, used the article as a teaching tool for seniors preparing for college and independence. Maya Chun represents the kind of critical thinking and moral courage we want to develop in all our students, she explained to her classes. She saw something wrong and took appropriate action to address it. The article also caught the attention of victim advocacy groups and law enforcement agencies in other states. Maya received invitations to speak at conferences and training sessions, though she carefully selected only those opportunities that aligned with her educational goals and maintained her privacy. Eleanor framed the article and displayed it prominently in her office, using it to illustrate points about leadership and moral courage to her business associates. "This young woman demonstrates what I've always believed," she would tell visitors. "The most important leadership qualities are observation, analysis, and the courage to act on your convictions." The article's most significant impact, however, was on other young people who read it and recognize their own potential to make a June difference. Maya received dozens of letters from teenagers who had been inspired by her example to trust their instincts and speak up about problems they'd observed. One letter particularly moved her. "I always thought adults wouldn't listen to me because I'm quiet and young, but your story showed me that being observant isn't a weakness, it's a superpower. I reported bullying at my school because of your example, and it actually made a difference." James kept a copy of the article in his office, not as a reminder of his own victimization, but as a testament to the power of unlikely heroes. Maya had transformed from a shy teenager into a confident advocate, and her example was inspiring others to find their own voices. The article concluded with a quote from Maya that captured her mature understanding of her experience. "I learned that protecting others isn't about being the strongest or loudest person in the room. It's about being willing to see clearly, document carefully, and speak truthfully when it matters most. The news coverage helped establish Maya as a credible voice in discussions about fraud prevention and victim advocacy, building a platform she would use throughout her college years and beyond to educate others about protecting themselves from sophisticated predators. The graduation ceremony took place on a perfect June morning, with Maya walking across the stage to receive her diploma as valedictorian of her class. In the audience sat James and Eleanor, beaming with the pride of chosen family members who had watched a shy teenager transform into a confident young woman ready to change the world. The framed photograph captured a moment after the ceremony. Maya in her cap and gown standing between James and Eleanor, her smile radiant with accomplishment and anticipation for the future ahead. It was a simple image, but it represented so much more than academic achievement. It symbolized the unbreakable bond forged between three unlikely allies who had faced down evil together and emerged stronger. "I still can't believe how much has changed in 1 year," Maya said as they celebrated at Eleanor's penthouse later that evening. "Last June, I was just a quiet girl who noticed things. Now I'm heading to Georgetown to study criminal justice with internship offers from the FBI and victim advocacy groups." James raised his champagne glass, real champagne this time, not the crystal flute that had trembled in his hand when Maya first whispered her warnings. "To Maya Chun, who taught us all that the most powerful voices are often the quietest ones." Eleanor's eyes sparkled with pride and affection. "My dear, you've given an old woman the greatest gift possible, hope for the future. Watching you find your courage and use it to protect others has reminded me why I've spent my life fighting for justice." The photograph would sit on Maya's desk throughout her college years, a reminder of where she'd come from and the people who believed in her potential. During difficult moments, challenging courses, demanding internships, frustrating bureaucracy, she would look at that image and remember the shy girl who had found the courage to speak. Truth to power. James had fully recovered from his ordeal with Victoria, though the experience had changed him in fundamental ways. He was more cautious in relationships, but also more open to meaningful connections. His friendship with Maya and Eleanor had taught him that family could be chosen, that trust could be rebuilt, and that being vulnerable didn't make him weak. "You know what the best part is?" James said, studying the photograph. "Victoria thought she was so clever, targeting a lonely man with abandonment issues. But her scheme brought us together. She tried to isolate me from people who cared, and instead she gave me a real family." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "Evil often defeats itself in the end." Victoria's manipulation required her to study human nature, but she never understood its fundamental goodness. She saw weakness where there was actually strength, exploitation where there was actually love. Maya's acceptance to Georgetown had come with a full scholarship and a recommendation from the dean of the criminal justice program. Her essay about finding her voice had been shared with faculty as an example of the kind of moral clarity they sought in students. She would graduate in 4 years with job offers from multiple federal agencies and victim advocacy organizations. But the real measure of her success wouldn't be in career achievements or professional recognition. It would be in the lives she protected, the predators she exposed, and the victims she helped heal. The shy teenager who had whispered warnings at a charity gala had found her calling as a guardian against those who exploited human vulnerability. The framed photograph captured a moment of pure joy and accomplishment, but it also represented something deeper: the power of unlikely heroes to change the world through quiet courage and moral conviction. Maya had learned that strength didn't require loudness, that leadership didn't require authority, and that the most important battles were often fought by those who simply refused to look away. When others were in danger. As the evening wound down, Maya looked at her chosen family, the mentor who had become a father figure, the wise woman who had become a grandmother's heart, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the journey that had brought them together. Victoria's attempt to destroy James's life had instead created something beautiful and enduring. "Thank you for believing in me," Maya said quietly. "Thank you for listening when adults usually don't. Thank you for having the courage to speak up James replied. "You saved my life in more ways than one." The photograph would become Maya's most treasured possession, a reminder that the quiet strength she'd once seen as a weakness had become her greatest gift to the world. And every time she looked at it, she would remember the night she found her voice and used it to protect someone who couldn't protect himself. The shy girl had become a warrior, and her battle was just beginning.